I've played Dungeons & Dragons for years. It wasn't my first RPG and it definitely wasn't my favorite. I mostly played it because everyone else did. I had fun with it and I still do sometimes, but I hit fatigue with D&D a long time ago. To be honest, I couldn't wait for another system to come and shove a dagger in its heart. See what I did there? My main criticism of D&D has always been that the rules feel too narratively constricting. They give you clear instructions on how to run encounters and dungeon crawls, but they don't encourage flexibility or the rule of cool. Whenever I tried to think outside the box, I was often met with, "It doesn't work that way." Over time, I found myself describing what my character was doing less and more often as the declared mechanics. I make an attack. No flair, no flavor, just dice. D&D feels old-fashioned to me. Its foundation has been largely unchanged over the decades, true to its wargame origins, and I think that's fine. I appreciate that the game tries to maintain some of its history as a core of its identity. But it's not the game for me. D&D should stay D&D, but I shouldn't stay with D&D. Some of my friends moved on to Pathfinder 2, but I couldn't convince myself to tag along. I saw the crunch and assumed it would be as constraining as D&D. My friends argued otherwise, but I wasn't interested. Instead, I played Exalted and other games, waiting for that fresh new game to come along. Then Daggerheart was announced. I was curious. It promised to deliver the same kind of big high fantasy stories, but with streamlined rules and more room for narrative freedom. Exactly what I'd been waiting for, right? I'd also watched Critical Role since they released their first episode back in 2015, so I was curious to see what their publishing company Darrington Press could pull off. Still, my expectations were mixed. I wasn't impressed with Candle Obscura, the first tabletop RPG they released. But I was hopeful. I avoided diving into previews or playtest materials because I wanted to experience the game fresh when it arrived. I prepared for disappointment, but what I found was more pleasantly surprising than I anticipated. This video is for anyone curious about Daggerheart, whether you're a player, GM, or just a TTRPG nerd in general. It's not a full review. YouTube is oversaturated with Daggerheart content right now, so there are plenty of reviews elsewhere. Instead, I'll be sharing my reflections after running a short, low-level scenario over a few sessions. How I prepared, how the sessions played out, what stood out, what hurdles I hit, and how I feel about the system overall. Spoiler alert, I have both positive and negative things to say, but I'm overwhelmingly positive. But before we get into all that, a quick plug. I released my own tabletop RPG this summer called MACHINEBORN. It's a high-powered sci-fi game with deep character customization, and it took me 8 years to create. It's available as pay what you want on DriveThruRPG and itch.io, with additional content on my website. I've also launched a Discord server that I would love to see more people join. Links are in the description. Okay, now let's talk about Daggerheart. I ordered the Daggerheart Limited Edition, and I was really impressed with the quality for the price. It comes in a beautiful box with a core rulebook, a GM screen, printed sheets and maps, a full set of dice, a big bag of tokens, and of course all the cards with a golden trim. I don't have the standard edition to compare it with, but the limited edition looks so good that I would have been happy with my purchase even if I ended up hating the game or never playing it. Just the tokens alone are worth it, and I've already found myself using them for other games. I don't have a bad word to say about the quality or content of the limited edition box. The cards are one of the things that really stand out in Daggerheart, though they aren't mandatory. They are essentially props for traits that could just as easily be written down as standard abilities. Some of them have effects tailored for tabletop though, like making you place tokens onto certain cards. They are there to add flavor, and while you can play without them, I feel like you lose out on the feel of Daggerheart if you do. I had originally intended to run the game in person, using the limited edition content with all the accessories. Unfortunately, that table disbanded after just 2 sessions, so I pulled together a new group and tried again. This time we actually finished the scenario, but we had to play online using Roll20 with Demiplane integration. And while it worked, it just wasn't the same. You lose out on some of what makes Daggerheart stand out when you remove cards and tokens from the experience. Play it at a table if you can. As for the rules, I'll go deeper into them later, but my initial impression was that Daggerheart is very easy to learn, but takes a bit of getting used to. The fundamentals are so simple that I felt ready to run the game after just one read through the rulebook. What really stood out to me though was the lack of an initiative system. That made me both a little curious and nervous. I expected it to feel clunky to run at first, but I found that the clunkiness I felt was mostly due to the contrast with the kinds of systems I was used to running. Much of it smoothed out in play. But before we get deeper into how the rules felt in play, let me first walk you through the kind of scenario I ran, and the prep that went into it. I spent quite a lot of time preparing for this game. That wasn't Daggerheart's fault. The system itself is straightforward and encourages collaborative storytelling and worldbuilding. The core rulebook comes with 6 campaign frames, which are basically mini-settings with unique mechanics slapped onto them. And this is one of the things I absolutely love about Daggerheart, its modular nature. The campaign frames show how you can add complexity to the base game without overwhelming players. They are optional. You can use the ones you like, ignore the ones you don't, or mix and match them for your own setting. That modularity is built into the system. I've always been a big Free League fan, and I own all the material for Symbaroum, but I never found a chance to run it. When I decided to try Daggerheart, I saw my opportunity. I ignored the campaign frames in the book and instead set the story in Symbaroum. That meant I had to read up on the lore, adapt some content, and make sure the system matched the darker tone of the setting. In the end, I created my own Symbaroum Daggerheart variant. I reflavored some ancestries to better fit Symbaroum, while also allowing a few that aren't canon. For the adventure itself, I adapted the Symbaroum scenario Call of the Dark. Originally, it's written as a level 8 Ruins of Symbaroum scenario, but I reworked it into a level 1 Daggerheart adventure. Surprisingly, that was easier than I thought. Because Daggerheart is streamlined, I didn't need to do much heavy homebrewing to make it work. Most of the work came from putting some adversaries and loot together, and later setting it up in Roll20. I also borrowed mechanics from Daggerheart's campaign frames. Since Symbaroum uses corruption, I combined ideas from Witherwild and Age of Umbra, 2 of Daggerheart's campaign frames, to create my own corruption rules. PCs could stack up on Blight tokens, which increased the risk for permanent corruption, or Blight scars as I call them. Whenever PC gained a token, they had to roll their Hope die, one of the dice types unique to Daggerheart. If they rolled equal to or lower than their total Blight, they received a permanent Blight scar. Players could reduce Blight with certain healing effects, a Cleanse Blight rest action that I added, or a homebrew potion type called Cleanse Potion. This corruption mechanic created a constant sense of tension. One player also wanted his ranger to be a chef, so I adapted the cooking rules from the Beast Feast campaign frame. That took more work to get right. Beast Feast normally replaces all rest options with cooking, but I made a weaker variant instead so we could cook while the normal rest actions stayed in play. My first implementation was rough. It pulled too much focus and the entire session was all about gathering ingredients and cooking. After some tweaks in between sessions, I found a way to fit it in more nicely and the group seemed to enjoy it. I also used the Keep Watch rest action from Age of Umbra to add even more tension between encounters. By the end, the game felt like a perfect blend. It felt like we were playing Daggerheart, but the setting also felt like Symbaroum. That's all thanks to how modular the system is. Like I said, prep time mostly came from adapting Symbaroum. Daggerheart itself was smooth to work with. Its battle point system works like D&D's challenge rating system, but equation isn't an exact formula. Combat turned out deadlier than expected, since PCs are generally easy to hit and some adversaries can deal automatic damage. 2 of my players triggered death moves by the end of the scenario. 1 survived, 1 didn't. I still think the danger felt appropriate for the story, but I realized that I couldn't rely entirely on the battle point formula. I had mixed feelings about Demiplane and its Roll20 integration. On one hand, it was helpful for sharing material, creating characters and accessing rules. On the other hand, it's still buggy and incomplete. Even something simple as adding custom loot was a hassle. And while I get that these things take time to implement, the game has been out for months, and core features are still missing. Most of our gameplay frustrations came from Roll20 and Demiplane, not from the system itself. Hopefully it will improve over time, but it's another reason why the game should be played at the table. For the rest of this video, I'm going to focus on the second group I ran Daggerheart with, the one that actually finished the scenario. We had 4 players, all people I've known for years. They're all in their 40s with decades of experience across a wide range of role-playing games. We didn't really have a formal session 0. Instead we had a late night Discord call where I introduced Daggerheart, gave them a sense of the Symbaroum setting, and they started making characters on the spot. I allowed content from the Void, which contains official playtest material still in development, alongside the core rulebook. The party ended up being an interesting mix of characters. A Clank Seraph who had survived since the fall of Symbaroum, a human druid from the corrupted forest of Alberitor, an Earthkin warlock reflavored into a human with innate earth powers, and a halfling ranger from Freetown who was searching for his sister's killer. Halflings aren't canon to Symbaroum, but I decided to include them in my adaptation because I wanted players to have more flexibility with Ancestress. The story I ran was based on Call of the Dark, a scenario from the ruins of Symbaroum's adventure collection. The party began in Alberitor, trying to make their way north to Ambria and the Promised Land. To get there, they needed to pass through the Titans, a massive mountain chain. But when they reached the cliff of Corinda, a border camp at the foot of the Titans, they discovered that the passage north was closed. That's where they met Irina Sarli, a young Ambrian noble. She offered them a deal. Help her recover a royal charter from her abandoned duchy in northeastern Alberitor, and she would secure their passage through the mountains. Character creation was smooth and surprisingly quick. 3 of the players finished their characters during that impromptu Discord call, and the last one made theirs the following day. By the time we sat down for session 1, we only had to finalize character connections before diving straight into the game. I think the quick and smooth character creation is one of Daggerheart's strengths. You make a few key choices, most of them represented by cards, and within an hour you've got a complete character with personality and everything. My group seemed genuinely excited about the characters they made. They fleshed out their connections, tied their backstories together, and ended up with a party that felt coherent and believable. It made sense that they would be on this journey together. Like I said, I didn't do a full official session 0, but with how fast the process was and the fact that I played with these people for years, we didn't really need to. We got the characters sorted, talked about the world and the system, and jumped straight in. Daggerheart is played using 2 D12s, one representing hope and the other fear. You add them together for a result between 2 and 24, but which die is higher determines the tone of the outcome. A success with hope gives the player a hope token, and maybe a little extra. A success with fear gives the GM a fear token, sometimes with a narrative complication. A failure with hope offers something positive in the setback, while a failure with fear is the worst case scenario. If you roll doubles, it's a critical success. Players spend hope on a number of things, like fueling certain powers. The GM spends fear to spotlight adversaries or make the character's day worse in some way. At first I was skeptical. I always found D12s clunky. The forgotten dice, the ones no one wants to use. Relying on D12s felt to me like a design choice made just to be different. I was also worried that the math would be awkward, but it wasn't that bad at the table. And online the VTT handled it. I also found it interesting that all the players rolled hope and fear dice. As GM I rolled a D20 instead for a wider range of outcomes. It adds a second dice resolution method on top of the main one, but it works. I mentioned before that Daggerheart doesn't use initiative in combat. Instead it uses a spotlight system. By default, the players have the spotlight and decide how to act. The GM takes it when a player fails a roll, rolls with fear, or when the GM spends fear to steal it. With a spotlight, the GM can trigger adversaries, use features of the environment, or push narrative complications. I feared the spotlighting system would be messy at first, but after a few fights, it flowed surprisingly well. What did catch me off guard was how quickly fear stacked up. At first I only used it to spotlight enemies, but eventually I leaned into using it for environmental effects or narrative tension. Running a dark fantasy setting gave me lots of excuses to push fear in more atmospheric ways, and once I got comfortable with it, I started to appreciate the system itself. I was worried at times that the way I used fear would feel punishing to the players. But when I checked in with them, they encouraged me to push harder. For example, I used fear to add blight to characters while around corruption, add stress in stressful situations, or simply to add narrative tensions like a nightmare vision or a ghost possession. One area that felt underexplained was allied NPCs. Without initiative, they aren't spotlighted like PCs or adversaries. They are treated more as features of the scene, with abilities the party can use either actively, reactively, or passively. For example, I gave Irina Sarli a cooldown that ticked down when a PC missed an attack and then culminated in an attack of her own. Another NPC could mitigate some damage when a PC was close to it. Unfortunately, the way NPCs are handled in Daggerheart made it so I forgot to bring them into play and they faded into the background. In my very first combat, a player berated one NPC in character for not helping enough, even though I tried to hand agency over that NPC to the group. By the end, even my second group admitted the NPCs felt invisible, which I think is more on me than on the system. Even though allied NPCs in Daggerheart are narrative features more than tangible characters, I built them using adversary stat blocks. This was partially because I didn't know how the PCs would treat them, but it also gave me a sense of their durability and abilities, and I could add some randomness to their fate. I didn't want to go into the game already knowing which NPC would survive and which wouldn't, so I made them just as valid targets for adversaries as the PCs, even if I didn't have them act and attack like the PCs could. A few NPCs died along the way, and I had to adapt the adventure based on it. It's not really Daggerheart as written, but it worked for the atmosphere I wanted. Combat overall turned out faster and deadlier than I expected. The battle point system doesn't really capture how dangerous fights can be. PCs start with low evasion, and adversaries hit hard, sometimes with features that inflict automatic damage. 2 of my players ended up triggering death moves by the end of the scenario. The druid survived, the warlock didn't. However, rules like the tag team mechanic, which lets 2 players combine their efforts for a more powerful attack, were used cleverly to drop even nastier enemies. Daggerheart isn't the most tactical game, but it does leave room for some teamwork and strategy. Most of the hiccups came from spotlighting being new to us, or from my own homebrew additions, like the cooking mechanic before I smoothed it out. Rules lookups were rare. Honestly, most of the interruptions came from Roll20 and Demiplane, not from the system itself. Overall, the pacing felt good. The roughest spots were early on, as we got used to spotlighting and figuring out how to handle NPCs. But the more we played, the smoother it became, and the system flowed quite naturally by then. So, how did my players respond to Daggerheart? The short answer is mixed. There wasn't a single unified reaction where everyone loved it or hated it. Focusing on the VTT group, since they are the ones who completed the scenario, overall they all agreed they wanted to keep playing. But that had more to do with us enjoying role-playing together than with the system itself. Still, nobody pushed back against playing more Daggerheart, and I'll take that as a win. The consensus between the players was that they had fun, but part of that fun came from the symbaroum setting, not just Daggerheart. I'm pretty confident they would have enjoyed the same scenario in a different system too. That doesn't mean they disliked Daggerheart, just that it wasn't a deciding factor in their enjoyment. There were a few frustrations. Some players compared their powers to others and felt like they were weaker in some regards, but in most cases that came down to misunderstandings or misreadings of certain effects. I had also allowed void content, which meant some of the group used playtest material, like the Earthkin Warlock. That led to errata and updates between sessions, which forced players to adjust mid-scenario. That's always the risk of using unfinished content, and not really the system's fault. There were some criticisms of the direct damage rule, which prevents players from reducing damage from certain adversaries using their armor. One player who had invested a lot in armor felt nerfed in fights against such foes, which is understandable. In the end, everyone said they'd play again. One player even said they didn't care if they kept their current character or rolled up a new one, they just wanted to keep exploring the symbaroum setting. Again, that says more about the strength of the setting than about Daggerheart specifically. Personally, I have no interest in running symbaroum in its native system, but I think Daggerheart handled it well. Most of these players are used to high fantasy systems like D&D, Pathfinder, Warhammer and all the Dragonbane. They seem to appreciate Daggerheart's simplicity, but it definitely didn't blow them away as a new favorite. And I think part of that came down to playing online. They didn't get to experience the cards and tokens, which are a big part of what makes Daggerheart stand out. Playing through a buggy VTT brought down the experience. That said, there were a few mechanics everyone loved. The downtime system was a big hit. Unlike D&D's short and long rests, which always feel the same, Daggerheart lets you choose 2 rest actions from a list of options. That made downtime meaningful and strategic, and my players really liked that flexibility. I also added some custom options like cooking from Beast Feast, keeping watch from Age of Umbra and cleansing Blight. The players also praised the death moves and the tag team mechanic, both of which added tension and teamwork to the game. I really enjoyed running Daggerheart. It felt like a breath of fresh air to me. It was easy to learn, quick to run, and its modular nature kept me engaged. I loved being able to borrow mechanics from different campaign frames, mix them together and adapt them for a symbaroum's darker tone. That sense of experimentation made running the game more fun. The fear mechanic also grew on me. At first I struggled to spend it effectively and often hit the fear cap, but over time I learned to weave it into scenes more naturally. You aren't forced to rely on fear to make moves against the players, but its existence alone fuels tension. Players see the tokens piling up and know I can spend them at any time. Sometimes choosing not to spend them when I could was enough to keep everyone on edge. Of course, not everything worked perfectly. Playing online through a buggy VTT meant we lost somewhat makes Daggerheart special. The cards and tokens from the limited edition are gorgeous, and I barely got to use them. I'll definitely bring those out at the table in the future, but I'm glad that I can at least use the tokens and dice for other games. One of the hardest parts for me when running Daggerheart was to unlearn all D&D habits. I was disappointed at first by the lack of detailed equipment options, but once I accepted that Daggerheart isn't about micromanaging inventories, I softened to it and leaned into narrative rewards instead. Combat without initiative also took some getting used to, but by the end of the scenario it felt smooth, natural, and deadly. Deadly but not unfair. If I ran it again, I'd lean harder into spotlighting and collaborative storytelling. Daggerheart wants you to share narrative agency with players, which is a common feature in modern narrative games. Some people love that freedom, others prefer when the GM handles everything. I'd nudge my group to embrace it more fully for the next scenario, because I think it would make the experience feel more uniquely Daggerheart and less D&D. Overall, Daggerheart supports my GMing style really well. I've always preferred games that strike a balance, narrative focus with some mechanical depth. My all-time favorite used to be Exalted, which takes mechanical depth to the extreme, but in recent years I've grown to appreciate streamlined systems more, though I still want a little crunch. Daggerheart hits that sweet spot. It's simpler than the games I grew up on, but it avoids D&D's trap of constraining players behind too gamified rules. It actively encourages reflavoring traits and using modular subsystems, like the ones from the campaign frames, to expand on the system as much or as little as you like. I'm also optimistic about its future. The Void already has new classes, domains, ancestries, even transformations. The fact that Darrington Press is expanding it this quickly makes me excited. I'd happily run this over D&D any day, but preferably at a physical table with all the accessories, or at least with better VTT support down the road. And to be honest, the rules made my job easy. This is the kind of game you can read on a Friday and run on a Saturday. My first read-through took about 3 hours, and from then on I rarely had to look anything up. The players didn't even read the rulebook, but they still picked it up effortlessly during character creation and the early game. So I went into Daggerheart a little wary. I wasn't impressed by Candle Obscura, so I didn't want to overhype myself for the game. But this time I came away pleasantly surprised. Even though my players were mixed, I genuinely enjoyed running it, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here. So, would I recommend Daggerheart? Absolutely. It's a great option for both new and experienced role players who want an alternative high fantasy game, and if you can, definitely play it at a physical table with the cards and tokens. That's where the system stands out. Without them, it feels a little more generic. It stood out to me how easy it is to pick up, how modular it feels, and how well it supports homebrew. I had no trouble adapting Symbaroum and Call of the Dark into a low-level Daggerheart scenario. That said, I've only run it at lower tiers, so I don't know how it holds up in long campaigns. I think Daggerheart is perfect for people who enjoy the storytelling side of D&D but don't want to get bogged down in resource and inventory management, stale encounters, and endless dungeon crawls. If you're new to tabletop RPGs, I'd even recommend starting with Daggerheart before diving into crunchier alternatives. And if you plan on running the game, I think Daggerheart might be easier to learn if you're entirely new than if you're shaped by old D&D habits. You can tell how much the game has been influenced by other narrative systems. I've become a fan of Fate in recent years. I even used that system as a basis for my own game MACHINEBORN. Daggerheart's experiences feel very similar to Fate's aspects, and my familiarity with Fate made it easier for me to guide players through coming up with appropriate experiences. There's also clear influences from Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark. My own experiences with those are more limited, mostly from Cult Divinity Lost and Blades in the Dark. Daggerheart feels like these narrative games had a baby and sent it to D&D camp for the summer. It borrows from all games, but somehow makes it work. From what I've played, Daggerheart seems to work well for one-shots and short arcs. I can't speak confidently about long campaigns since I haven't run it at higher tiers, but my gut says it should hold up decently. That's something I'll need more time with the game to know for sure. In short, I was pleasantly surprised by Daggerheart. It's been a long time since I've felt genuinely excited running a system, and I could see it replacing D&D or other high fantasy games for me. That said, I haven't seen how it holds up in the long run, so my opinion might change over time. From my perspective, it could even be one of those games that's more fun to run than to play, and I haven't played it yet myself to figure that out. Anyway, this wasn't meant to be a full review. I only wanted to talk about the things I've actually had hands-on experience with. If you play Daggerheart yourself, especially at higher tiers, let me know in the comments how it went and how you feel about the game's long-term playability. Also let me know if you want to see more Daggerheart related content from me in the future. Until next time.